Hi friend, I'm Kate, and welcome back to Things Kate Made. Today I'm back to working on the quilt for my spare room. After switching my studio and my spare room, I realized that the white bedspread that I have in there, it's just not quite working anymore. It kind of sticks out like a sore thumb. So I am working on making a super scrappy, slightly more traditional quilt to replace it. It's made up of 16 patches and sawtooth stars. As you can see from behind me, I have already finished making all of the 16 patch blocks. And if you want to check out that process, you can watch this video or check out the playlist that's linked in the description below. But today I'm going to walk you through how I make the sawtooth star blocks. If you've never heard of a sawtooth star block, that's perfectly okay. It's a traditional block that looks like this, and it's usually made up of squares and flying geese units. I like to make my flying geese with the 4 at a time method, which I'll show you in just a bit, and I typically make them a bit oversized so that they can be trimmed down to the right size once they're pieced. Some of the fabrics that I'm using in this quilt are directional, and I chose not to worry about keeping them, lined up and directional when I was making the 16 patch blocks. I was okay if things sort of twisted and turned. But when I'm making these sawtooth star blocks, I do want everything to line up. So I'm going to pay just a little bit more attention. For example, in this one, this star in the middle, all of the stripes are running parallel to each other, regardless of if they're in the point pieces or that center block. That same fabric is used on the outside of this block. And again, everything's running parallel regardless of which piece it's in. So I will show you how to keep track of that as you're making these sawtooth star blocks. And it's actually not as hard as you would think. Let's go over the pieces you'll need to create a sawtooth star block that finishes at 8 inches. For the outside pieces, you'll need 1 5.5 inch square and 4 2.5 inch squares. For the inside pieces that make up the star, you'll need 1 4.5 inch square and 4 3 1/8 inch squares. The large outside square and the smaller inside squares are what are used to piece our flying geese. Here are a few block combinations that I'm going to be piecing. The fabrics on the bottom of each pile are my outside fabrics, and the fabric on top of each pile is my inside fabric that will make up my star. In the top row, neither my outside nor my inside fabrics are directional. In the second row, these two combinations have directional fabric on the outside. And in my third row, the combinations have directional fabric on the inside. In this final combination over here, I have directional fabric on both the inside and the outside. I'll show you how to handle each of these situations so that your blocks come out exactly how you want them to. The first step to making a sawtooth star block is to make our flying geese units. And in order to do that, we need to draw a diagonal line from corner to corner on each of our smaller inside squares. Now, if your inside fabric is directional, this is where you'll need to pay just a little bit of extra attention. So I'll walk you through each situation and show you how to do it. For solid fabrics or prints with no directionality, like these, simply draw a diagonal line from opposite corners on the back of each of the inside 3 1/8 inch squares. If the outside fabric of your block is directional, like it is for these two combinations, you don't need to worry about it while piecing the flying geese. That background fabric will magically work itself out. So go ahead and draw your diagonal lines on the smaller inside squares, just like you did for the non-directional prints. For block combinations where the inside fabric or the star fabric is directional, you'll want to arrange all 4 squares so that they're facing the same way with respect to the directionality. On 2 of the squares, you'll draw diagonal lines from the bottom left corner to the top right corner. And on the other 2 squares, you'll draw a diagonal line from the top left corner to the bottom right corner. If you're chain piecing and working with lots of pieces, it's helpful to pin the first 2 squares together and then pin the second 2 squares together. Once you have all your lines drawn, it's time to get sewing. Let's start with the block that has no directionality so you can understand the basic process, and we'll layer in directionality. We're going to start making the flying geese by taking the 5.5 inch outside square and aligning the 2, 3 1/8 inch inside squares on top of it like so. Be sure that the drawn line continues from point to point. Then sew 1/4 inch on the top of that line and 1/4 inch on the bottom of that line. Now we're going to cut on the drawn line and open the pieces so that we have 2 heart-shaped units. Finger press the seams and then lay the other 3 1/8 inch squares on the top of each heart so that the drawn line bisects the heart. Again, sew 1/4 inch away on both sides of the line and cut on the drawn line. When you open each of these units, you'll now have 4 flying geese units. Remember that these are oversized, so you will need to trim them down. I'll show you that in a minute. Before we do that, let's go back to our block combinations where the outside fabric is directional, but the inside is not. Like I said when we were drawing out our diagonal lines, the outside fabric will magically work itself out. So we'll treat these just like we did the non-directional. Lay out your smaller squares on top of your larger squares and stitch 1/4 inch away from the line on both sides. Then cut on the drawn line and open both units. Then lay out your remaining 2 smaller squares on top with the line bisecting the heart. Again, sew 1/4 inch on either side, cut them apart. Now you should have 2 flying geese with the directional fabric running up and down, and 2 flying geese where it's running side to side. If we arrange these around the center of a star, you can see how the directionality plays out. Now let's talk about the combinations where the inside fabric is directional. These will be the ones that require the most attention, but the overall process is the same. First, take your 5 1/2 inch outside square and 2 of the 3 1/8 inch side squares and lay them out as we did for the other. It's important that the 2 smaller squares have the drawn line in the same direction. Just like before, we'll sew 1/4 inch on both sides of the line, cut on the line, and then open our pieces so that we have 2 heart-shaped pieces. When it comes time to lay the second 2 3 1/8 inch squares, you can double check that you've drawn the line in the right direction by flipping back the square and making sure that both star points run in the same direction. Then sew, cut, open, and press. Once again, you'll have 2 flying geese with the directional fabric running up and down in 2 and running side to side in the other 2. And if we arrange these around the center of the star, you can see how the directionality plays out. For the final block combination where both fabrics are directional, I'll follow the same process we just did with one added step. I'm going to lay out my first 3 pieces where both little squares have the line drawn in the same direction. Here's the extra step. I'm going to flip back both little squares so that I can make sure all my stripes, both inside and outside, are running parallel to each other. Oops, they're not. So all I need to do to fix that is rotate my 5 1/2 inch square 90 degrees in either direction, and then they'll all align. Now we're going to sew, cut, open, lay out, check, sew, cut, open, and we have 4 flying geese that when laid out with the rest of the pieces form a sawtooth star block with all the prints running in the same direction. Now that all the flying geese are pieced, we need to trim them down to size. For this finished 8-inch block, we need our flying geese to be 2 1/2 inches by 4 1/2 inches. Because I know I'm going to be cutting literally hundreds of these, I went ahead and taped off my ruler so that I could more quickly line everything up. I went ahead and made sure that the intersection is at the 1/4 inch down and 2 1/4 inch dot. That's where I want the point of my flying geese to line up. I then taped the diagonal lines that I'll align my seams with, as well as the 4 1/2 inch line and the 2 1/2 inch line that I'll use on the second step of trimming up. Taping off all these lines allows me to go into autopilot while I'm trimming up the blocks. geese are trimmed, you can start laying out the blocks. When I'm chain piecing a large number of the same block, I like to lay the blocks out one on top of each other. This allows me to do all of the thinking of how the block lays out at the beginning, and then I can just focus on sewing the pieces into rows and the rows into blocks, and I can sort of turn my brain off and just forget about what I'm doing and just sew, sew, sew. Now that I have all of my sawtooth star blocks finished, I can finally start piecing this quilt. I am loving how it's turning out. It is super traditional and scrappy, but has modern pops of neon stars in it. The colors are meshing better than I could have ever hoped, and I can't wait to see how this looks on my spare room bed. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and maybe subscribe to my channel so that you can join me on all of my future quilting adventures. I'll see you next time, everyone. Okay, I'm back, and I finished putting together the whole quilt top, and it looks freaking awesome. I am so in love with how it turned out, and it's honestly exactly what I had in my head, which doesn't always happen when it comes to making a quilt. So now that I have the quilt top finished, I need to figure out how to quilt it, and that's where I need your help. I'm pretty sure, like 99% sure, that I want to use the Baptist fan motif to quilt this. It's a super traditional design, and I think it's going to add some great overall texture. But what I don't know is if I want to use my long arm to machine quilt it or hand quilt it. So using my long arm would definitely get this project done much faster, and it would be much easier. And while this is a spare room bed, it is on the bed that my dog lays on the most. So it will be washed with some regularity, and with her jumping up and down when she gets the zoomies, durability is a little bit of concern to me. So long arming points are faster and more durable. Hand quilting, however, I think this quilt really lends itself to hand quilting. I think the traditional nature of it and just that yummy texture that hand quilting gives you would just, oh, they'd marry so well. So I love the idea of hand quilting it. I'm okay with it taking a lot of time. I want it to be right, not just fast and done now. Long arming would be done faster and more durable, but I just don't know that it's the right style for this quilt. So you tell me, which would you pick? Hand quilting or long arming? Let me know in the comments below and help me make up my mind.